Dear participants, hi, this is Professor Dr. Tuğba Karabulut from İstanbul Ticaret University. It's my pleasure to host Professor Dr. Ranjay Gulati'yi today. He will be talking about deep purpose, the heart and soul of high performance companies. He is from Harvard Business School and he is a well-known author. More than 77,000 researchers referred his articles, his books. So we are happy to host him today. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation, dear Professor Gulati. Welcome to our webinar. Hi, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you today and have a chance to talk about my research. If you had told me 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I'm going to write a book about purpose, I would have said you're crazy. Not a chance. But here I am to talk to you about this topic. If you look at my own background, it's really in the area of strategy implementation. And so much of my, I hope you can see my slides, or yes. Yeah. Much of my research was about how do companies unlock growth in good times and bad, and how do they catch market inflection points? I was looking at organic growth, inorganic growth, companies grow by acquisition, grow themselves, customer centricity. And my basic finding was that 5 years ago, I thought I had the formula in my head. What I researched was figuring out a good strategy for companies and then figuring out an implementation plan to implement those strategies. That was my research, really, strategy formulation, strategy implementation. And I thought that's it. And this was very connected to my own kind of classical training here at Harvard with our famous professor in the 60s was Kenneth Andrews, who introduced the word strategy into business. And his idea was every business can be understood by tactics, strategy, and vision, the what of business. And then there was the how of business, the organization, the values, the culture, the structure. So there was the what and the how. That's what I studied. What do you do? How do you do it? And this why question was kind of irrelevant, to be honest with you. Who cares about why? I mean, it's some abstract, philosophical, existential question. Why are you here? Why are you here on this planet? Why do you do what you do? It was very much an individual level thing people should do when they retire, is my thought, thinking, at least at that time. But then I came across some interesting research. I found the following, first of all. This is a paper came out in Harvard Business Review in 2015 by two authors who were looking at what motivates people to work hard in companies, in their jobs. And the idea was that people work hard when they feel satisfied at work, when they feel they have a fair wages, there's no bureaucracy, they have training and tools. And then in the 90s, we introduced the idea of engagement, which Gallup and others started measuring. If people are more engaged, they work even harder. And then their finding was that there's a third level, when people feel inspired at work, when they do what gives them meaning and purpose. That somehow when they feel meaning, and by the way, look at the data they showed. The productivity data was stunning, that people are, when they're inspired at work, they're willing to work more than twice as hard, as satisfied. So this was interesting to me. I said, oh, people, when they're inspired at work, maybe this is interesting. I was also at the time studying startups, and my own family, my mother was a fashion designer in the 1970s, early 70s. And she had this idea to take Indian craft fabric and put it on Western clothes. No one had done it before her. So this idea to make skirts, and now it's widespread, right? But the skirts and blouses, and her idea was to show the Western world that India is poor, but we are not backward people. We are very sophisticated, aesthetic, artistically. And she started this business, and she wanted to help women in these villages get jobs or have businesses so they could also have their own livelihood and also have her own business. So she worked crazy hours, and everyone there was working crazy, and no one complained. They were never complaining. And then I also started to now fast forward 5 years ago, I'm studying some startups which have grown very fast. And I'm asking the founders, what are the biggest challenges of scaling your business? And the universal refrain I hear is, we lose that spirit in the company, that entrepreneurial spirit. I'm like, what do you mean by that? And they say, oh, well, you know, it's like a family and we work really hard and we are culture. I said, no, I need to know specifically. So 1 year of interviewing people like that, 65 CEOs, and I finally came up with this idea of what I wrote an article called The Soul of a Startup. That there's some kind of force inside a company. One of the elements of that force is purpose, this energy that drives them to want to do something. So I had this idea also. And then I interviewed Satya Nadella. I was really trying to, I'm teaching a course now on turnarounds and transformation of businesses. And Satya's story is an amazing story. So I was interviewing what he had done at Microsoft. And he said, you know, we needed to build a new strategy. We needed to implement the strategy. I'm like, I got it. Those are my two buckets, strategy implementation. He said, but to do any of that, we needed to have a purpose. It was like a secret sauce. I'm thinking, what do you mean purpose? He says, no, you know, it was a framework through which we then built a strategy and also implemented the strategy. It's still not sinking in my head, you know, and then, you know, I also saw though, many companies are posting their purpose on the web, right? So people are putting it on the websites. And there's some suggestive data by some people, this is a McKinsey study, showing that, hey, listen, purpose actually can improve performance and maybe even more during crisis, right? And their consulting firms are also producing studies showing correlation between purpose and long-term performance. But the media is very skeptical of this. You know, this is the Financial Times saying this is just smoke and mirrors. They call it purpose washing, also called virtuous side hustles. You know, and then there was an academic article called Sex, Lies, and Mission Statements, that all these companies that do horrible things pretend to have a noble purpose. So the media is saying this is useless, right? But in my mind, the idea was I have always studied how do companies do well. And in my mind, it always was strategy and implementation of strategy. But if I believe some of these stories and the data, that maybe there's a third pillar that might be called purpose. And that this purpose might help companies perform better. That was the hypothesis. So this project began during COVID. Because I had lots of time and everybody I wanted to talk to seemed to have lots of time, I interviewed over 250 people for this project across 18 companies. And I went beyond the usual suspects. Everyone talks about, there were so many books about this subject, and they all talked about Patagonia, Ben and Jerry's, you know, the usual company. I said, I have to look beyond them. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to look at this question. I'm going to ask the question, what is purpose for an organization, not an individual? I understand individual life purpose. What does it mean for a company or organization to have purpose? Why does it matter? Why should we care? Is it good for business or not? And how do you do it? Now, I will touch on the third one only briefly, but that's like 6 out of 8 chapters in my book. But I feel I need to spend time on the first 2 with you before we can even talk about the third one. What is purpose? It's really interesting. The word purpose actually is an individual level idea. From ancient Greeks to ancient Indians to ancient Mesopotamians, all ancient civilizations, Chinese, they study the meaning of life. They talked about this. They questioned, why are we here? This is not an abstract question. It's a very current question also. Even psychologists today study it. That does having a purpose in life make a difference to our well-being? And they find that people who have purpose in their life live longer, healthier, happier lives. So they're better leaders. They work more effectively in work. They're more creative. They're more innovative. So this is understood. But what is individual purpose? So there are many definitions. I'm going to share one that I like a lot. It's a Stanford psychologist. He defines purpose as a stable and generalized intention to accomplish something that is at the same time meaningful to the self and consequential for the world beyond the self. So this is individual level purpose, but I think it has relevance to organizations as well. And I want to share with you the most important word in this definition is and. meaningful to the self and consequential for the world beyond the self. So we're looking for something that is meaningful to the self. It's not like I'm only doing something for the world and ignoring myself. It's trying to connect the meaningful to the self and consequential for the world beyond the self. But the problem when you could take it to organization is it turns into a mission statement. So what do you do with that? So, even when I talked to Satya, I asked him the question like, hey, listen, I just don't know what to do with this. I mean, this mission statement is kind of generic, right? And how do I kind of make sense of that? And he said one thing very clearly. He says, yes, the words may be meaningless to you as an outsider, but you don't know the 9 months we spent debating to get to these words, right? You don't know how we use these words, how we bake it into the DNA of our organization. So what I learned from him was purpose is not a purpose statement. It's the idea behind the statement. What is the intention behind it? It's a unifying, in my mind, purpose is a unifying ideal of the problems you want to profitably solve in the world as a business. It's overarching. Johnson & Johnson has a credo. We exist to do this. And it has a commercial and so let's remember, it's about what value you want to create, how you want to create it, for whom you want to create it, right? So it has multiple parts to it. And it's ambition. It has goals. I want to be number one in the world in this, that, and the other. It also has a sense of duty in it. And it's long-term. Purpose forces you to think, why are we here in the long term? What's our agenda here? And then when you think long-term, you naturally have to think about different stakeholders. So purpose is not stakeholder capitalism. It's, it's more than that. But I found most companies didn't even understand. In fact, I was talking to my publishers and they were very keen to have a one-word title of the book. Purpose. I couldn't do that. I came to realize I had to call it deep purpose because most companies, in fact, I have a whole chapter on shallow purpose, convenient purpose. You see, some companies do purpose as disguise, just to pretend. Enron, Theranos, Purdue Pharmaceuticals, even Facebook, if you will. Some do purpose as kind of ESG, CSR, charity project on the side. Some think of purpose as win-win. I'll only do good things when I can make money doing them, and I'll call that purpose. I think those are all what I would consider are superficial purpose, right? So I think purpose is a way to understand your place in the world, and it does force you to think about value. So you say shareholder value and other value, like how are we going to play this game? And it allows you to think about the trade-offs you have to make, because when you think of expansive value, you think about customers, the employees, community, society, planet. It forces you to think long-term, short-term. I'll give you an example. One of the large food chains here in the US is Panera Bread, and I interviewed the CEO. And what happened after COVID, most of the people who don't want jobs in those organizations. They don't want to work as a store manager. So the turnover of store managers is very high, and without a store manager, you can't run it. And they have a couple of thousand stores. So they're saying, pay me more. This is ridiculous low wages for long hours, very stressful job. At the same time, customers are saying you're too expensive. So customers saying you're too expensive, employees saying pay me more. How do you deal with that? How do you decide what are those trade-offs and choices? How do you think about that even? So, I think, and I looked at a whole range of companies. I'll skip this example, but I think I wanted to point out that I came to realize that, purpose is not some management tool. It's not some, okay, we do, Six Sigma, now let's do purpose. Or we do Agile Scrum or something like that. It's really a statement about yourself as a business. How do we think of the world? How do we think of ourselves? Why do we do what we do? It's really a core essence about saying, this is our company. And So I think it's important to think about purpose as kind of like, what is the essence of your business? Now, it forces you to think long-term. It forces you to think about the stakeholders you're trying to serve. It forces you to think about your ambition. It forces you to think about your duties. So purpose is kind of a forcing mechanism. So when Satya said 9 months debating our purpose, it said to get to our purpose, we had to really ask ourselves, why are we here as a business? Now let's think about, is it good for business? Who cares, right? And a lot of people said purpose is tax on business. In fact, purpose is distraction. The Economist even described purpose as undemocratic. It says because now through purpose, you have CEOs of companies getting involved in social projects, and they're unelected. It's none of their business to poke their nose in social affairs of society. And now you're saying they can get involved in gun control, they can get involved in abortion, they can get involved in this, that, and the other. They should stay out. That's not their business. So now you have that problem also. So people say purpose is distraction and purpose is tax on business. It's a way to get companies to spend more money on social projects. And I interviewed this gentleman who's European, is a chairman of a large energy company. And he said, I pity those who think of purpose coming at the expense of performance. And I think is what I came to realize, this one slide I'm going to show you, it took me a year to figure out. I started to ask people, okay, great, I know what purpose is now, but why do you want to do it? Like, what's it going to give your business? Like, you say it's good for business. I want to know, how is it good for business? And I heard 3 pathways by which purpose can be good for business. First, purpose is direction. It creates clarity on where we are going, why we're going. So when you have to make trade-offs and choices and turbulent markets, we have so many things going on. We have a war going on. We have a pandemic that doesn't go away. We have a recession that doesn't seem to. How do you make trade-offs and choices? So back to my example of Panera. So what do? He said, we're going to raise wages 20%. But we're also going to raise prices 15%. Now, customers are already unhappy. So how do we give them something more? So they launched a sip club saying, if customer pays $10.99, unlimited refill of coffee and soft drinks. So I'm looking for creative, and when these customers come in for drinks, almost half the time they order some food. So you're looking for creative ways to say, what's our purpose? How do we deal with trade-offs and choices? Microsoft having to lay off people now, right? How do you think about, or exiting Russia? These were big decisions for them. How do you navigate through those choices? So purpose reminds you of a central orienting framework. Once in a while, you may refresh it. The next one is purpose is motivational. I showed you the data already. Employees today, especially Gen Z and millennials, seem to care a lot about purpose. I wanted to just ask, Professor, do we have time for Q&A, or should I go all the entire 1 hour?
You can continue, we can extend it. It doesn't matter. So we have time. Don't worry about it.
Do they want to ask me questions, or?
They do, but at the end, they can do it like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. You can use your time. Do you want to stay 1 hour, or do you want?
I'll stay 1 hour, but I'll be done in 45 minutes, and I'll save 10, 15 minutes at the end for Q&A.
Sure.
The next one is motivational. And this is really interesting. You know, I showed you one data study already about inspired workers as being more than twice as productive as satisfied workers. There's ample data, especially in high talent. It's not just culture they care about. They also care about being inspired at work. That what I do is inspiring. I mean, I'm making and it's not Save Society or the Amazon forest. It's saying, hey, you know, what we do seems to matter. And the last one is culture is relational. Interesting. Companies with purpose seem to attract, you know, more loyal customers. Trust is the key word that emerges from purpose. I just finished an academic article where I looked at how purpose elicits trust in others. So how do we think about that? So, you know, this is a McKinsey study showing employee expectations. 82% of employees feel it's important to have a purpose. 72% purpose should receive more weight than profit even. Have a purpose statement, and 42% say that, so there's huge opportunity here on the motivational side, but also on the directional and also on the relational side. So I already showed you this data. I want to just remind you, this is what I showed you in the beginning. Look at the productivity changes. So motivational is a huge one. I thought I'd show you a video, okay? What an inspired worker looks like. So this is an amateur video a colleague of mine shot in a cruise ship, and her job is a greeter. And I just thought, just to break up the flow a little bit, you'll see what is an inspired worker, how do they perform in the workplace? Extreme example, I admit, but I just wanted to wake you guys up a little bit.
Oh man, we got two people going.
Ladies and gentlemen, once again, give me a boost, sweetie. Good morning. Enjoy your breakfast. Bye bye, sweetheart. Have a nice day. Good morning, good morning. And bye, madam, sir. Have a lovely day. Good morning, good morning, good morning. And bye bye. Hope you have a wonderful day. And hope you have a wonderful day, sir. Bye bye. See you again. Bye bye. Please have a nice day. And sir, have a nice day. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Enjoy your breakfast. And good morning, good morning. And good morning to you. How are you? Are you feel okay? Okay, have a wonderful day. Yes. And good morning to you. Have a wonderful day. See you again.
Oh, I said 10 times.
Bye bye, sir. See you again. Have a wonderful day. Bye. Have a wonderful day. Bye. Good morning. Good morning. And hope you have a wonderful day. Now see you again. Bye, sir. Have a nice day. And good morning again. And hope you have a wonderful day. And
So that was motivational, okay? And there's data to back it up. I don't have data to back up the other two sides, directional and relational, but I want to remind you that purpose creates an orienting framework to give direction, and purpose is also elicits trust. I have a paper coming out in a journal called Strategy Science with a co-author and former student of mine, Franz Wolgesogen, on how trust is elicited with companies that have purpose. And, I found this not just in Microsoft, but other companies too. I mean, look at the relational piece, consumer trust and prefer to that put purpose first. So you're seeing emerging evidence that companies that have purpose strongly woven into their brands, at Unilever in particular, they actually have some brands that are purpose driven and some brands that are not. And they find that the purpose brands are growing much faster than the non-purpose brands. So, and you look at the companies that have enduring brands with purpose at the core, you can see so many amazing companies that have decided to make purpose a central theme in their brand. So I want to just remind you that purpose does matter, okay? Purpose does matter for firm performance. That's the piece that I had to understand. I'm now embarked on a large sample study where we're measuring company purpose and trying to correlate or find some causal models around performance. That's the next project. Now the question is, how do organizations enact purpose? Right? This is the bulk of the book. I'm going to let you read it, I hope. But I want to give you some teaser into this. Because, it's not enough to write a purpose statement. Okay, everybody read the statement. Here it is. Email, a little video message from the CEO saying, hello, it's in our annual report. We talk about it. Everybody, it's on the wall everywhere. It's on your screensaver. Please memorize it. Doesn't work. How do you bring it into the DNA of the company? The one thing we know, one of my colleagues here has done a study where they measured company purpose orientation inside the companies. And there's an exponential decay in understanding of purpose when you go in the companies. And, that I think is telling. It's really hard to take this idea into an organization. In fact, typical reaction is one of perplexity. What am I supposed to do with this? Right? I mean, how does this fit into my life? Your company has a purpose. What about me? Why should I care about this? This is really, really hard. How do you get people in the company to really say, oh yeah, that connects to who I want to feel inspired at work. Some company purpose is going to make a difference. How do you make connect the dots? And this is, I think, the tricky question to ask. So I think if you think about the phases of purpose journey, there is kind of the discovery phase. There is the articulation phase. I found that discovery is very important, first of all. If you have a purpose statement, that's great. Some companies do a refresh, like Microsoft did a refresh. Johnson & Johnson did a refresh, but Lego didn't have one. So the CEO went into the archives of Lego to see what had the company done in the beginning, right? And so many other companies did not have one, looked into the past. Bueller, a Swiss company I looked at, also kind of said, let's look at the past. It's about discovering, not inventing, discovering, detecting. Then the next one was, how do you put it down in words and how do you communicate it? You see, you can't just say, here's my one line, memorize it. You have to tell it like a story. Why is it that every religious scripture in the world is written through stories? Stories are much more powerful mediums to communicate meaning. You have to tell purpose through stories because this is meaning. You're trying to communicate the meaning behind these words. So how do you communicate that? The next one is, how do you actually activate it inside the company? Is it through KPIs and metrics? Is it through the culture? Is it through the structure? What are the levers available to really drill this into the organization? And then how do you sustain it? This is not a once in a 10-year, let's talk about purpose now. How do you sustain it in the organization? So in the book, I talk about each of these. I'll touch on a few of these with you, and then we can open it up for Q&A. Let's start with just discovery. This is what the former CEO of Lego had to say to me. He said, you know what? You don't decide what your calling is, you detect it. So he went into the archives and found that the company, original founder had this idea of intelligent play. That was what Lego was all about, intelligent play. And then the question was, why are we in theme parks? Why are we doing, electronic games? Why are we doing movies? And so he realized they had lost their way. But part of purpose is similar to this Ghanaian folklore bird, the Sankofa bird, that flies forward while looking backward. How do you engage with the past, but not get lost in the past? Some people get lost in nostalgia. So in the book, I talk about nostalgia with postalgia. How do you look forward while at the same time looking backwards, right? And you can see many companies that have done this. They engage with their past. So I did an article in Harvard Business Review in December, which is entirely focused on looking backward to look forward, right? I mean, there are many, many examples you can think of, that you could imagine a company that really kind of looks into the past. Then comes the telling the story. How do you tell the story? How do you tell it as a big story, as I call it? And I'll give you the example I used in the book is I looked at Pepsi. Pepsi was a great example where the CEO, Indra Nooyi at the time, basically talked about it in three parts. There's a Harvard Kennedy School professor who's a framework on storytelling. How do you effectively tell compelling stories? It maps into exactly what this woman did. It was an amazing leader. She was an amazing leader. It's about, he said, it's about self, us, and now. You make it personal. She talked about growing up in a poor household, medium middle class household in India, where her mother had to get up every day to fill water because the water only came in the morning. And they had only 4 buckets of water for the whole family, right? She talked about us. Why do we need to do something about it today? And now, why do we need to do something now? So self, us, now. That, I think, becomes the key, right? In fact, the CMO of the company at the time said it was complete surround sound performance to the point where eventually people knew by its abbreviation, PWP. So understanding how to communicate the story becomes important. And for a leader, you know, there was a famous Stanford professor, Jim March, who said leaders have to be poets and farmers. See, you have to bring magic, that's what, and logic into the story. So I think it's important to understand that then you come to the hard part of how do you now bake it into the organization? The culture, the structure, the processes, the people, and the culture. This is our classic congruence framework. And the question is, if you have purpose in the middle of it, how does it change the organizational architecture? How do you make it measurable? Now, the last piece of this puzzle is measuring purpose. And I've discovered in my research, nobody measures purpose. Are we doing purpose or not? But they look for ways to correlate with those measures. So this is EY, one of the companies I looked at. Their purpose statement doesn't mean anything to you, building a better working world. But then they said, if we are living our purpose, there are going to be 4 dimensions of value we are delivering on. Client value, people value, social value, and financial value. So we're going to measure ourselves on those 4 things. Then they built a strategy around it, and they built values around it. Everything in one slide. So, you know, you have to see, but the holy grail in all this is making purpose personal. How do you connect it to individuals? How do you bring it alive for the people who work in your organizations? And I found interesting, some companies, not all of them, some companies had a hypothesis, which is you can't make an employee think about company purpose when they don't know their own life purpose. So they started training for employees on figuring out their own life purpose. And as they think about their life purpose, somewhere in the middle of life is work. And they said work should be part of life. And I will tell you a personal story over here. So, you know, I told you my mother was running a fashion business and she used to work crazy hours, always like 7 days a week. And I was a teenager and she had me working crazy hours. So one time I was sitting with her having dinner in a restaurant and I told her, I said, Mom, why are we working like 7 days a week, 24/7? And she put her fork down and she said, Ranjay, my wish for you is you never have to work a day in your life. Now, the teenage brain in me thought she is about to tell me about my trust fund. I never have to work. So I was very excited. I said, yes, Mom, tell me more, tell me more. And she was very quick. She said, no, that's not what I'm thinking. What I'm trying to say is that you never should feel like you keep talking about work-life balance. She said, it's a horrible phrase because it says work. It's saying work is not life. I mean, maybe there's work-leisure balance, work-family balance, but work is part of life. So you should find something that doesn't feel like it's work. So in the context of purpose, work, what we do in our work or job or career is part of life. So these companies are saying, how do I connect that? So when people go to work, in the time they're at work, they feel, it's connected to my life purpose. I'm making a difference. It's part of my life, but I don't know what my life purpose is. So how can I connect it to my work? So some companies do this, not a lot, but because the data is actually quite amazing. When people find purpose at work, they're more engaged, productive, they're more resilient, and they're more likely to stay at the company. And we also know that when people have life purpose, they have reduced stress, they live longer, and they buffer against sickness. They don't get sick that often. So that's kind of the overarching frame. So let me summarize the project for you. The book has really 3 parts to it. What is purpose? Right? I wanted to clarify that purpose is not a purpose statement. It's not a mission statement. It's much more than that. It's a unifying ideal of the problems you want to profitably solve. It has goals, duties, long-term thinking, forces you to think about the choices you're going to make in the future. It really has benefit to it. It's not like it's just a good feel-good exercise. It's good for business. But the how is not so simple. This is not just some kind of write a mission statement and give it to everybody. You have to really work to bake it into the DNA of the organization. So I thought I'd end by showing you another short video. This video was made by an Indian company for its employees. They heard about this incident happening. It was in a village in India. It's a soap company. So they make soap. right? It's not some fancy products. They make simple soap. And there's one actor in there, but everything else is original, real. So they were allowed to bring in one actor. They were allowed to tape it, but it's a real story. And they made it for their employees. You can see what inspired means, and I hope you will find it connected to this idea of having a purpose and constantly wanting to reinforce that purpose. So let's watch it, and then we'll take some questions.
ஆளொரு மேனியும் பொழுதொரு வண்ணம் என் மகன் வளருகிறான் உள்ளங்களிலே இன்பம் பெருகிட மனதில் நிறைகின்றான் தாயும் தந்தையும் விரும்புவதெல்லாம் ஒன்னேதானுங்க ஐயா ஒன்னேதானுங்க கண்ணுக்கு கண்ணான தான் பெத்த பிள்ளை துள்ளி விளையாடியே மனதை மகிழச் செய்யணுங்க தெய்வம் தந்த செல்வமையா நான் பெற்ற செல்வமையா ஆரோக்கியமும் அறிவும் பெற்று வளர்ந்துட்டானையா மனம் மகிழ்ந்தோம் ஐயா நாமே மனம் மகிழ்ந்தோம் ஐயா இந்த மகிழ்ச்சி என்னும் வேதனை எதுவும் மறைந்திடும் ஐயா ஐயா நாளொரு மேனியும் பொழுதொரு வண்ணம் என் மகன் வளருகிறான் உள்ளங்களிலே இன்பம் பெருகிட மனதில் நிறைகின்றான்
मेरा बच्चा 5 साल का हो गया।
इतना सब 5 साल में कौन सी बड़ी बात है?
बड़ी बात है मैडम, ये गुंडापा का पहला बच्चा है जो 5 साल की उम्र तक पहुंचा है।
Every year, diarrhea and pneumonia claim the lives of 2 million children under the age of 5. These deaths can be prevented by a simple habit, washing hands with soap. Lifebuoy has taught this life-saving habit to over 150 million people. We have now adopted Kugda Jagat, the village with a high child mortality rate. We pledge to save lives lost to these infections, so every child can celebrate a 5th birthday. Help us save more lives. Join our mission.
So let me end with, since I'm from India originally, I'll share an Indian quote written in a book written roughly about 3,000 years ago. This is not a new idea, purpose. So, this is written roughly about 1200 BC. This person, we don't know who he or she was, said, you are what your deepest desire is. As your desire is, so is your intention. As your intention is, so is your will. As your will is, so is your deed. And as your deed is, so is your destiny. So I think this idea of purpose, which I would never have thought about writing about 5 years ago, has been really meaningful to me. You're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. I've put a bunch of, not a lot, I don't put a lot over there, but I have some newsletters where I have interviewed select CEOs. So after I finished the book, I went on a further exploration and I interviewed 10 CEOs from around the world. And those are in a podcast that is free. It's on deeppurpose.net, the book website. But I also posted kind of summaries of them I discovered that there's a lot of companies in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, in the Middle East talking about purpose. So even I had to open my eyes and realize that, the CEO, Sim Shabalala, CEO of the largest bank in Africa, talking about purpose. David Velez, largest digital bank in Latin America, talking about purpose. Dylan Pillay, CEO of the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Singapore, talking about purpose. So you'll see how incredible leaders today are talking about it. And I think as researchers are now, there's a special issue coming out in the strategy science. There's several events at our annual conference about this topic of purpose. So purpose has kind of become topical. So anyway, I want to stop over here. I want to thank you for patiently listening to me. And I'm going to turn it over for some questions as well.
Thank you very much, dear Professor Gulati. It was very nice presentation and speech. We appreciate your efforts, and we are happy that we have you as a guest today. Okay, so let's ask some questions. Medine, would you like to ask a question to our professor? She's our PhD student.
All right. Oops,
I'm a PhD student of Tuba Professor, and I'm so thankful for you. And it was great listening.
Oops, your audio is gone, Medine.
Medine, we cannot hear you. We cannot hear you. Maybe you have to just approach to the microphone, maybe. We cannot hear you, Medine.
It was there, then it went away.
Sir, sorry. During the correction, so maybe can I ask a question in between, and then maybe she can.
Just give me a second, okay, Fuat. Medine, can you connect again? We cannot hear you, Medine. Okay, maybe by that time, Fuat, you can ask a question. You go ahead.
Yes. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Ranjay Gulatiyi for the presentation, and I want to introduce myself. I'm Fuat Silan. I'm a student for the PhD on business administration, and I want to know that how to prioritize actually the purpose on organizations to be a successful organization based on defining the customer and their needs, or competitors and the market, or just consider on human on peoples, to have good peoples on the organization. So there are three things that I want to know which one to prioritize when we are talking about purpose.
So look, first of all, it's a great question, which ties to this larger question about stakeholder capitalism and how you decide who is more important. Customers are more important, employees are more important, or something in the marketplace about competition and trying to win in the marketplace is more important. And in the end of the day, it isn't one is better than the other. You have to find a way to connect all of them, right? And you can add to that. There's also society and social expectations, right? There's also the planet. How do we think about these choices and trade-offs? And I don't think purpose tells you this one is better than, but purpose forces you to provide a way of thinking about the problem. So let me give you an example. One of the companies I studied is a company called Gotham Green. So Gotham Green is an agro-tech company. They are doing farming on urban rooftops in big cities like New York, Boston, San Francisco. They are renting the rooftop of high-rise buildings and making hydroponic farming over there. And they are farming only herbs and salads, which get spoiled very quickly. So if you don't have shipping, you don't have wastage, spoilage, and you're also reusing the water. So water consumption is lower. So it's very eco-friendly farming and almost no waste because the product is sold half a mile down the road in the grocery store. One big issue they had to deal with was plastic packaging. How do you package this thing? So they said, let's try compost. No, it doesn't work. Compostable packaging doesn't work. They tried no packaging. That also doesn't work because customers want it in packaging. Finally, they had to use PET 1 plastic, the classic plastic, because that was the one that keeps it freshest longer. That's what customers want. So purpose didn't tell them what the right choice was, but purpose gave them a chance to say, really, we need to debate this. They spent 6 months debating, researching, and now they've made a commitment to keep looking at options for packaging because they don't want to be doing plastic. So it doesn't tell you what is the right answer, customers number one or employees, or in the case of Panera, they made employee number one. They said, we got to pay them more. And customer, you're going to have to pay more. So it doesn't tell you what to do, but it gives you a framework. So, we always say there are a framework of in which you have to operate. So that's what I wanted to talk about to you,
Thank you, sir. Thank you. And parallel to my question, I would also want to know that, sir, what will be the big challenge for the future leaders while they are building the organization?
Excuse me, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, I'm coming to you. Let me answer fourth question really quickly, and I want to come to you, Madine. So I think, I think businesses today have to learn in a multi-stakeholder world. There was a time when businesses could say, I am working for shareholders and everything else is somebody else's problem, right? I don't need to worry about stakeholder capitalism and all this other stuff. Today, society expects more of business. We are facing a lot of problems. We have an environmental catastrophe. We have other social problems. Inequality and environment, the two alone are major, major problems that I think have to be addressed. And so how do we think about that? Becomes a real challenge. So I think it's important to kind of keep those in mind. And I think as researchers, we need to ask ourselves, how are we studying organizations? Are we still operating in how to make businesses more successful from a shareholder perspective? Or how do businesses navigate through these challenges? So keep it in mind. Madine, your turn.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Hi, everyone. It's me, Medina. And it was so great listening to you. And your presentation is so thankful. What you said fascinated me. I want some question. The high performance of companies is a very important issue, My question is, how can companies sustain sustainable growth and high performance? And what are the key concepts?
Yeah. So look, we always find that what you're talking about is the holy grail of sustainable growth. If you look at history, it's not very kind to companies.
Yes.
You read Jim Collins's book, Good to Great, all the companies are in the toilet. You read Built to Last, all the companies are in the toilet, right? So you reach In Search of Excellence, all the companies are in the toilet. So it's very hard to have lifelong sustainable growth. Even Amazon, which is the big company today, everyone loves to talk about, Bezos said, one day Amazon will fail. Our job is to delay it as long as possible, right? And I think we have to understand that there is somehow inertia, complacency. There's some things that hold companies back when they're successful. So as researchers, first question to ask is, why do successful companies run into trouble? Why? What happens to them? That's the first part of the puzzle. The next part of the puzzle is like, okay, what do companies need to understand about, sustainable success, right? And we use convenient words in business. We have pivot, agility, resilience. I think, we have to really unpack what those mean. Unpacking those ideas. And then people get into other debates. To tie it to Fuad's question, people say, the secret to sustainable growth is customer centricity. You have others saying, no. The secret to sustainable success is employee centricity. Because if employees are happy, they will take care of customers. Others say, no, customer is important. Employees should be taught to focus on customers. So we can debate and quibble about what comes first. But in the end of the day, an organization needs to recognize its place in the world. Why are we here? Employees, customers, community, society, planet, shareholder, everybody. How do we imagine our place in the world? So having an understanding of your place in the world, I believe, is a very powerful way to then solve these problems as they come up. I'm just finishing an article coming out in Harvard Business Review in July on thriving in down markets. How do you succeed in down markets? We are coming into a recession, so it seemed the timing was right. And, and that was kind of the focus. And so that's kind of where my own thinking has evolved into. And I think, it'll be out in July, but I can tell you that what I found was that in every recession, if you went back to the 3 previous recessions, 80% of companies take 3+ years to recover. 17%, not 75%, 17% of companies fail in recessions. 9% of companies, I'm getting the math slightly off here, come out of recession stronger than when they went in. So you can read, there was an earlier article that came out in 2010 in Harvard Business Review, which I wrote. And now there's a sequel to that coming out now in 2022 around this idea. So it's a very important question.
Thank you so much for everyone and most of you.
Thank you, Medine. Thank you, Fuat. Yeah, we have some other students. Abdurrahman, would you like to ask a question?
No, hocam. Not
Okay,
now.
Yakuba, would you like to ask a question? Mehmet, would you like to ask a question?
Hello. Yes, Tuba hocam. Hi, Professor. I am very happy to listen to you, but sorry, I lost the first 15 minutes because I was driving. And I have 2 questions for you. One is, in today's business, the important social purposes, diversity and sustainability for the companies. What is the future social purpose for the companies that they can grow their performance and make a high performance? And my second question is, for me, and in the emerging market, the companies that have some difficulty to extend the multinational companies. How they can adapt their purpose from national companies to multinational companies? What is their challenge in this process? Thank you.
Yeah. So look, both great questions. So let me try to answer them.
Thank you.
The first thing we have to understand is that there was a time when we had a sacred wall between business and society. Business's job was to do business, not to get involved in politics or society or social projects or anything. Okay, you took care of your employees. Maybe you built a school in your community where your factory is, a little bit of here and there, but by and large, you were removed from that. That is getting harder for companies now. I mean, you look at Disney in Florida, right? Disney announced they were not going to say anything about these issues. Then the employees complained and said, we will quit if you don't say something. So then Disney came out and said something. And then the governor said, I'm going to kick you out. I'm going to tax you. I'm going to do this to you. So you are in a very hard place. Now, it's happening maybe more in the US, maybe less in other places in the world. But I think the idea that business in some way are removed from society in addressing social problems, environmental problems, I think is naive. Businesses get a license to operate from society. And society now, increasingly, customers are more loyal to, to companies where they feel they actually have a purpose. And so you start to see that making a difference is the first thing. But I think there's a larger question about turbulent markets where you have lots of things coming at you, back to the Medina's question earlier. How are you going to make those trade-offs? How are you going to build a winning strategy? How are you going to say, we know where we are going and why and how are we going to take on these different competing trade-offs, employee, customer? Purpose doesn't answer the problem for you. Purpose just gives you a framework to think about the problem. Gotham Green chose PET plastic for their packaging. It wasn't the right answer because it's, hypocrite, you're saying environmental company and you're using plastic packaging. Come on. But it was the way they had to think through the problem. It gave them a framework. So in the case of Microsoft, they said that when we make decisions, very hard decisions they've had to make, right? We use our purpose and say, people say, how can you be purpose? You laid off employees. They say, look, to be a viable, thriving business for the people who are here and for our customers, we need to have a different size of business. And so we have to figure that out. So it doesn't answer the question, but it gives you a framing to think about the choices you have to make. So I want to thank you all for inviting me. It's been really a pleasure. You're welcome to continue the conversation on LinkedIn with me. You can find me there. I'm not very active, so I promise not to flood your inbox. Or you should go and watch these podcasts. I found 10 CEOs from different places. I mean, in the Middle East, for instance, I interviewed Mona Ataya, the founder of Mom's World. Incredible leader. How she built the business, how she created a framework to think about. It wasn't just selling mother's products. It was really trying to create a framework to think about what her business was here for. Very inspiring story. In India, I interviewed Anand Mahindra. So you will see a number of great leaders. I'm just interviewing them, asking them questions, but they're giving the inspiring answers. So anyway, I want to wish you all the very best. I want to thank our host here, Professor. Thank you
very much.
And I really enjoyed being here. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Gulati. It was our pleasure to meet with you. And we would like to see you in our university whenever you have time. You are welcome to come to the university and Istanbul and Turkey, of course. And I'm also in the field of strategic management and entrepreneurship. If you want, we can do joint research together. So feel free to contact with us, and we will keep in touch with you. Thank you very much for your time. And I just wanted to ask a very, very short thing to you.
Please.
What might be the potential research areas for professors in the field of management? Okay, which emerging topics do you consider will be more popular?
So look, I will give you a very self-serving answer of what I'm studying right now. I think what is amazing to study right now is how do companies deal with turbulent markets, right? And I think it's important to understand why they fail to deal with turbulence. Why do they not change? Like everyone says, come on, why do some companies change and adapt and others don't adapt? So adaptation and change remain important questions, right? But I like purpose a lot because it hasn't been studied. Other topics, it's been beaten to death, So I like this topic because it's an area that is becoming very important to business leaders, but business researchers, we are always one step behind. And we're always one step behind on this.
And how do you think that companies should make the purposes of the stakeholders and shareholders to be aligned?
So you have to read my book to really understand that. I actually talk a lot about that. I also wrote 2 articles in Harvard Business Review last year. And there's a forthcoming, actually the article in Strategy Science is on the website now. It is about purpose and trust. And those will, in fact, the academic article on purpose and trust has a lit review in the back of all the recent research on this topic that has been published. And it's part of a special issue. So there are like 7 or 8 other excellent articles in there. So you may want to, if for researchers, I would suggest going there. I did another piece in 2022 on startups and purpose. and it was called "Why Do Startups Go from Big Ideas to Grand Ideals?" So that's another kind of a foray into the topic. So, but great question.
Thank you very much. We would like to see you in our university whenever you have time. Okay.
I hope
Thank you very
so.
much
Thank
for
you.
your
Yes,
time.
thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor.
I will send you
Yeah.
a mail for the link also. You can share it in on your social media accounts. Bye bye. Take